Or with this, like when I run out of wind on it, I can feel the drag in.
Okay. Good afternoon, happy Halloween, and welcome back. Told you I may or may not be in costume. Thankfully, I was able to pull it together. I do not know how to play Master of Puppets, but still thought it'd be fun. So welcome back. I know that we've been gone for a little bit of time, so I do want to do a bit of housekeeping and some updates for today, and then we'll be getting into some of the new stuff. So today, we're going to spend some time debriefing the midterm exam. So over the weekend, I went through and graded all of the midterms. So your grade is available on Canvas. Your grade also has the short essay feedback and score on it too. So you'll notice, if you haven't already, that the short essay lists some feedback on each of your responses to the prompts, gives you a total score out of 100. So I definitely recommend looking through that for that portion. You should also be able to see the questions that you got right or wrong now on the exam. So I want to spend some time going over the midterm, some of the trickier questions that people had, as well as some things that went into good short essay responses. I also want to talk about the next major assignment in the class, reporting and reflection essay, that'll be coming up 3 weeks from today, giving you some time to prepare and think about it. As well as the feedback that you gave around the midpoint of the quarter for the course. And then we'll get into the role of talking and interpersonal communication. This week, we'll be looking at both talking and listening and some of the ways that we use conversations in communication for fulfilling needs and engaging with others. So the midterm grades overall were pretty solid. So as you're looking through your grades and want to know the percentage score or letter grade that you got, the best way to do this is to take your score and divide it by 2, right? So say you got 200 points, divide it by 2, that's 100, that's 100%. So 100 of those points were for multiple choice. Each of those 25 questions was worth 4 points. And then the short essay, each of those was worth 33, and everybody got a free point. The average grade was in the 84, 85 range, so mid to low B, which was pretty good. The highest score was perfect, right? Got all the short essay and multiple choice correct. The way that I curve is if the highest score is less than the full amount, then I'll add that much to somebody's score. So because there's somebody who got 100%, your score is not curved above or below. I did toss question 14. But interestingly, everybody got this one right. This was about different styles of listening, such as being a people or content-oriented listener. We have gotten into some elements about listening and how we listen, but that's actually something we'll be going into more detail about for this week. So I didn't think it was fair to ask you that one, but ended up being a moot point anyway. So I mentioned that at the beginning of the term that it's a good idea to regularly check for the announcements on Canvas. And I also mentioned that you should expect at some point in the course that there was a secret code word in one of the Canvas announcements that if you sent it to me would give you extra credit. So last Monday, I included in this Canvas announcement to all of you that if you replied or emailed me the word chili by the end of the day on last Friday, you'd get 4 points of extra credit. So for those of you who sent me the word chili last week, you have those 4 points added on to your score on the exam too. So just a reminder to everybody to continue to check the Canvas updates, since it contains a lot of good information and updates related to the course. If you do not feel great about your grade or how you did on the midterm, I understand, right? There are a lot more opportunities to do well in the course. We have a final exam that'll be structured very similarly to this one, same multiple choice and short essay. We also have the essay assignment coming up. We have an extra credit that you can do by the end of the term for 20 points or 2% on to your final grade. And we'll have the remainder of the Canvas prompts too. So there's a lot of opportunities to bolster your grade if you didn't get the score that you wanted to on the midterm exam. I'm also happy to chat with you in an office meeting if there are specific things that you want to talk about with your score on the exam that you need some additional help with. So let's go ahead and talk about the exam. I'm not going to go over every question, but if you would like me to talk about a question as we're working through and give you some more pointers on this one, let me know. I'm just going to mostly go over the questions that had a little bit more trouble. So feel free to stop me at any point if you'd like to go over a different question. So this first one, the best answer here is temperament, right? Because temperament is about a genetic predisposition, whereas personality is more of a combination of genetics and culture. So like a dog's temperament is based on the genetic characteristics that it inherited. So temperament is the best answer here based on genetic components. Communication dispositions, including approach avoidance and introversion, extroversion, are the best answers here. Things such as cognitive or socio-communicative are more about how you think or how you approach thinking about the world, whereas communication dispositions are how outgoing you are, how much you initiate conversation with other people. So communication dispositions are how you choose to communicate or engage with other people. Regulating is the best answer here. The big reason why is that there is no use of verbal communication in this example, right? Dave is tapping his watch to indicate that we're out of time. So that would not be repeating or complimenting because there's not a verbal message that he is reinforcing or supporting, right? Regulating is using nonverbal communication to manage an interaction, like waving somebody down, saying we're about out of time, right? Gesturing at the clock or door. So regulating or managing the relationship through communication is the best answer to this one. Muted group theory suggests that dominant groups shape perceptions of reality. We'll be talking about social penetration theory this week. It's more about how we choose to disclose and share more about each other over time. Enforcing is not one of the 6 functions, right? We can accent or contradict. We're highlighting or going against the verbal message, but enforcing would not be one of them. So we talked about a couple weeks ago the idea of the abstraction ladder in verbal communication, right? The ladder at the very top has very abstract language, such as thing, and very specific language at the bottom, such as computer mouse, right? Syntactic rules would be more about how you use grammar or punctuation in a sentence. A dismissing fearful style, right, is one in which you value yourself, but you don't necessarily value the other person or the relationship. A preoccupied style is one where you do value other people and want relationships with them, but you don't value yourself, right? And a secure is high value for yourself and for other people. Motivational is a desire or want to engage with other cultures. So that would be the best answer here, whereas cognitive is about the knowledge that you have. Metacognitive is your awareness about your own knowledge. Face work is about managing public persona, and going back to face negotiation theory. So the true false, some of them were a little bit tricky. So a text sent to 5 people would not be interpersonal communication, it would be group communication. Right, so you think back to the pyramid, interpersonal communication is primarily between 2 people, and it involves a meaningful exchange of messages between those 2 people. So 5 people would be under group communication. Norms, right, are unwritten rules. They're just things that you do. We don't do that here, right? Whether or not you give a bow would be an example of a norm, whereas a rule would be hard-coded behavior like the US Constitution. Tone of voice is nonverbal communication, and this is because how you say something, vocalics, if you're emphasizing certain words, your pitch, your timbre, those things fit under nonverbal, and verbal is the use of language. So tone of voice would be nonverbal. So I wanted to talk about some of the things I noticed in the short essays, and people who engaged well with those responses did a few things in addressing some of these. So first, in ethnocentrism, I was looking for a clear definition of ethnocentrism, right? This being the idea that you believe your own culture is better than somebody else's culture. People did a good job of explaining how the use of stereotypes and judgments hurts the ability to communicate. Collective self-esteem. So one of those 4 factors would include things such as membership esteem or importance to identity. People brought up some good points and some of the strong responses here about how if a group is stereotyped or not thought about in a positive way, that an individual member finds themselves less likely to want to associate or be a part of that culture or group. Some strategies. So I think the best answers to this part of the call utilize some of the steps of cultural intelligence, right? So things such as motivational intelligence, behavioral intelligence, and so on, to talk about actions people can take to become more aware and sensitive to the needs of other cultures. So this one was answered a lot, and I think some of the best responses were doing some of those things. This one was about theories. So one thing I noticed in a couple of responses was that they utilized concepts in interpersonal communication rather than theory, right? So something like ideal self would be a concept because it's an idea or term that's used, but it wouldn't be a theory. A theory is a broader way of thinking about or predicting human behavior. So theory candidates could be things like uncertainty reduction theory, things such as muted group theory, face negotiation theory, and so on. A lot of people chose uncertainty reduction theory and muted group theory and contrasted those, which is pretty good. One thing to note, if you chose muted group theory, right, that theory is very much concerned with language and about how dominant groups create language that can be exclusionary to other groups. For example, we talked about this idea of how land as commodity was not a thing that a lot of indigenous groups thought of in that way. Or the use of gendered language like fireman or chairman rather than chair or firefighter, right? So in part 3, some good applications of muted group theory might talk about how the use of language in that relationship and exchange might be impacted by how dominant groups can kind of create language. So maybe saying, oh, you're going to be a fireman. No, I'm not, right? That would be an example here, muted group theory in action. Perception, attending, organizing, and interpreting. There's quite a variation in people who felt like one of the 3 was the most important, but if you had a good argument for it, I thought you did a great job. Emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is both our ability to understand our own emotions as well as those of other people. So including that definition was important. And also it helps our perception because if we can better understand the emotions that others are having or the emotions that we're having, we can make sense of them and support our conversations in that way. And then culture, right? So I was looking for a good tangible example. One that was used that was really good was in a culture, maybe it's customary to use nonverbal communication to kiss somebody on the cheek as a greeting, but in another culture that would be seen as offensive or violate their autonomy, right? So that'd be an example of how perception of that nonverbal communication could look different. And then lastly, this one was about intrapersonal communication. And I tried to be really clear here 3 or 4 different times that this was intrapersonal, which is communication with yourself. A couple of people did interpersonal communication between 2 people. So this is intrapersonal communication. So we use this, right, in order to fulfill certain needs, such as helping ourselves to think through tasks. I really like, there's a point that a couple of people brought up, that we don't always choose to do interpersonal communication. It just happens. Right? We have an internal dialogue, we have thoughts, we have self-doubt in our head. It just happens whether we like it or not. I thought that was a pretty good response. And then some of the needs that it does and doesn't fulfill. So it's looking for both. Maybe it fulfills some of our safety needs because it helps us to plan what you're going to get for lunch. But maybe it doesn't fulfill some of the social and belonging needs because you don't get to interact with other people. And then lastly, I was looking for examples on how you use interpersonal communication in your own life, which I feel like a lot of folks were able to do pretty well. All right, so I know I covered a lot of ground here, but I just wanted to make sure to debrief and note things that I think went well in these short essay responses. Any other questions related to the midterm exam? Yes.
So you said that we were able to see your responses to our like the last bit.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not seeing where that is.
Okay, it should show up as a submission comment. So if you're still not seeing it, let's double check after class. And I can also repost that for you if it's not shown. Yeah, but if you have issues with accessing the comments on the short essay portion, just let me know and I will resend them to you. All right. So that is the midterm. Again, the final exam is very similar to the midterm in its structure. The final exam is cumulative in the sense that everything we talk about builds off of itself. Like we can't talk about conversation without talking about interpersonal communication or the communication model. But we are going to be primarily focusing on the exam on things past this point. So everything from now on are things that are good to know for the exam. I will also have another study guide and another set of practice questions to help you. All right. So next thing that I want to talk about is the recording and reflection essay. So this assignment is due 3 weeks from now. It's your one essay assignment for the course that is due on November 20th. And this assignment is a whole lot of fun. I did this as a student myself. And one of my favorite things in this class is seeing people who have conversations. For instance, I had somebody who had a conversation with a grandparent who grew up in a very different cultural and racial climate as them and had a lot of stories and experiences to tell. I had my own conversation for this assignment with my dad, where we were talking about his life experiences as he retired and reflected on his career. Maybe you have a conversation with a close friend or family member that you're really wanting to have. What I want you to do for this assignment is to think about a conversation that you'd like to have with somebody. It's maybe 10 or 15 minutes in length. It can be somebody that's important to you, like a family member, a friend, a roommate, somebody that you know and want to talk about in that way. And what I want you to do is to, first of all, reach out to them and say, hey, got an assignment for a class that needs to record a conversation, right? Check in with them in advance about the recording and make sure they consent to that ahead of time. And then once you have that conversation, and it might go longer than the 15 minutes, in which case you're welcome to cut out a section of it that you want to focus on. I'll be asking you to transcribe the conversation. In other words, type out the conversation, you and that other person. You can also note some things such as parts of nonverbal communication that you want to flag as well. And then after you make that transcription, I'm going to be asking you to apply concepts from the course to reflect on and make sense of what you noticed, right? Hearing your own voice and transcribing this conversation, there's a good chance that there are a lot of things that you don't realize that you do as you're talking to that person. For instance, maybe you learn, wow, I'm a really time-oriented listener. I kept saying that I only had a bit of time. I kept looking at the clock. I kept trying to speed somebody up as they were talking. Whatever it is that you learn or gain through that process is an opportunity for you to apply some ideas and skills from the course there. So what I'm asking you to turn in for the assignment would be the full transcription of the conversation. I don't need the audio recording. 2 to 3 pages, double spaced, standard font and margins where you're doing the essay itself. And then a full works cited list that generally would just include citing from the textbook. So those 3 parts are the things that you'll want to include there. To help you on this assignment, I've included a couple resources. The first resource is an example outline. The second resource is a rubric. So let me go over the rubric first. This is what I will be using to grade this assignment, so you know what to expect. Again, the transcription, the essay itself, and then the works cited or reference list in APA, MLA, or Chicago are the things that you're going to want to include here. So out of 200 points, the first thing you'll want to include is that full transcription, right? So do you have that transcription with yourself and another person? I'll also be posting an example transcription on Canvas so you know sort of genre or expectations there. Secondarily, conventions and references. So again, include full APA, MLA, or Chicago. Really give it a full look to just make sure that you are capitalizing proper nouns, that you're breaking up clauses with commas, and preventing run-on sentences with periods. The content, right? I'm really looking at you using examples from the transcription, from your conversation, and applying those examples to concepts from the course. So really focusing on that rich application of material is what I'm looking for there. And then organization, right? So I think that the classic essay style is a really good way to structure this one. So an introduction paragraph that goes over the main ideas, talking about some of the things that you have learned through the process and the situation where you have this conversation, 2 to 3 body points that go over different concepts or ideas in interpersonal communication, and a conclusion that restates and summarizes your key ideas. Tell me what you're going to tell me what you told me. I've included an outline here that gives you a sense of what to expect and how you're structuring this. This is available for you to access on Canvas. First of all, the introduction establishes some of the basics of the conversation, who you're talking to, about what, and previewing the main ideas. Through this conversation, I'll be talking about social penetration theory and the listening styles that I used in this conversation. The body paragraphs should talk about the concept or idea that you're drawing from, using elements from your conversation and discussing the ways that they connect. You can have 2 or 3 major body points. And then the conclusion summarizes some of the things that you went over and maybe talks about the significance. What did you learn through this process? What stood out to you? What have you gained in terms of interpersonal communication through this conversation? So again, I know that writing an essay is not the most fun thing in the world, but through the combination of resources on Canvas and some of the activities like this week's Canvas prompt that will help you in brainstorming for it, I really encourage you to start thinking about this assignment. I think that once you get into it and really start exploring and having this conversation, that there's a lot that you'll be able to learn and take away from doing that. So think about who you'd like to have the conversation with. I think this week is a great time to start thinking about who you want to talk with, when, maybe even setting up the time to do so. So this conversation should include verbal communication. So something like talking with somebody face-to-face or doing like an audio, Zoom or phone call would be okay, right? Something like just sending text. I encourage you to include a spoken element in your conversation rather than just sending through text. I think you'll have more to draw from and pull out if you're including an audio component there. Check in before that conversation starts. Let them know that they're being recorded, rather than surprising them after the fact and saying, "Aha, I recorded you." That's weird. Take some good time to transcribe. It can take a little while to do that. One rule of thumb, so for my research, I transcribe a lot of interviews, and that takes a while. So at the very least, give yourself double the time of the conversation to transcribe. One way you can do this is you can alter or slow down the pitch so that it more aligns with your typing speed. And then think about the ideas or concepts from the course that you're interested in bringing in. So we'll be talking a lot about talking and listening this week, which would be excellent candidates. We'll be talking about things like social penetration theory, which again would be an excellent candidate for this assignment. So that is coming up here, and I'm happy to look over rough drafts or outlines if you send them to me, and I'll give you some pointers and feedback on that. Or if you're just trying to figure out who to talk to or what to do and need some help with that, I'm happy to chat further about that as well. I have a student in my last class who said, I don't really talk to people for like 10 or 15 minutes. Who do I talk to? And then kind of took a moment, and then he was like, oh yeah, there's an old friend that I want to have coffee with, right? So you might be thinking about who you would like to spend that amount of time talking to. Maybe it's a conversation you've wanted to have but have been putting off. All right, any questions about this assignment coming up? Yeah.
So are we turning in the transcript?
Yes, so you're turning in the transcription, but you do not need to turn in the audio
But
recording.
are we adding that to the paper, or is it like a separate thing?
So that is in addition to the paper. So the transcription from the audio, that would not count toward the 2 to 3 pages, the essay itself, 2 to 3 pages, and then the references. Yeah, so you can cite or like quote from the transcription, but the 2 to 3 pages should be in addition to the transcription of the audio.
It would be a good way to do the transcription, like either a full name or just like the initials of the person speaking, what they say, kind of like text message.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I think abbreviating it will just make it a lot easier for you later. And I'll have a transcription example that I'll also post later. Good questions. All right. If you do have any questions about these later, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to chat further. Last thing, and I know we have a lot of housekeeping stuff as we're catching up that I want to go over, is thank you. A couple weeks ago, you worked on that feedback about what's going well and some of the things that you'd like to see adjusted or changed for the course. The big one that some people mentioned is wanting some additional time on the Canvas prompts. So one change that I'm giving in response to your feedback is that from this week forward, all Canvas prompts will be due by Sunday at 11:59 rather than by Friday. I do not like to assign weekend homework. I feel like, the weekend should be a time to do other things, but I want to support your autonomy and know that you have limited time as a student. So I want to support you in completing when works best for you. Of course, you're welcome to turn it in on Friday still, and I will still have those graded and returned back to you within a week of the due date. But I do want to give you that additional couple days. A couple people also mentioned having more opportunities for group activities and class discussion, and maybe working through some of the material a little bit more slowly. So I'll be doing that. We'll be doing more of those kind of activity, application, discussion type things in the course too. So thank you for participating. If at any point there's anything I can do to further support your accessibility in the course, please let me know. So let's get into talking and the role of conversations in communication. So conversations are things that we do a lot, right? Conversations are things that we know when we see and hear them. But I think breaking down what a conversation is and what makes for a good conversation is not something that we spend a lot of time doing, right? There's a good chance that there's somebody in your life with whom you feel like you have great conversations. Maybe it's a family member, like an uncle or aunt, who has a really cool life story. And every time you chat, there's so many things you learn about them. Or maybe it's a close friend and roommate that grew up in a similar location as you, or just has like a lot of the same interests as you, right? In any case, there are a lot of things that we just find socially meaningful and fulfilling from conversations that we gain with other people. And a big part of interpersonal communication is understanding the dynamics of a conversation. We know how to communicate verbally, but how does that play out? So conversations are generally considered to be dyadic, right? They are a dyad that generally consists of two people. Yes, you can have a group conversation, but oftentimes, the most meaningful exchanges we have are between two people. Conversations serve three different roles, right? They can build relationships. One example being that maybe you are a member of a new club, like you went to the first agripreneur club meeting, and maybe there's somebody who reached out to you afterwards, who's like, hey, I'm glad you're here. I want to get to know you better, right? Building a relationship with somebody is oftentimes in that first stage. We maintain relationships. How many people regularly talk on the phone with friends or family? Yeah. I know talking on the phone isn't as popular. You might text or use updates through there as well. I like to talk to my mom every week because it's good to catch up and maintain a good relationship. We also ideally use conversations to terminate relationships, although we don't always, right? It's generally considered to be passé, although not uncommon, for people to break up via text or end a relationship via text, or suddenly you find out that somebody has blocked you. That's one way of terminating a relationship. And there's a lot of different reasons why somebody would do that, but oftentimes, right, we might feel discomfort with terminating a relationship through conversation because it can be uncomfortable, it can be awkward, it can be difficult. But in a lot of circumstances, we want to give the dignity of autonomously terminating a relationship through conversation. Although for safety and other reasons, we might not always choose to do so. So that's how we do social interactions, through conversation. There's a really cool example in your reading for this week that gets at the inevitability of conversation. right? One idea here is that they studied inmates, right? And the concern is that these prison inmates were talking to each other and exchanging information that might be associated with illegal activity outside of the prison. And so the warden and sort of the people in the prison felt that the best solution would be to reduce the amount of conversation time that the inmates had, reducing the amount of time that a common space is being used. And what happened, instead of them actually stopping communication, was that they started to communicate by tapping pipes, and were almost able to, they were able to use Morse code and communicate in different ways. So communication is inevitable. We find ways to communicate. They're different, right? We know from the switch to online and remote platforms over the past couple of years that translation doesn't always work, but it is something that we do regularly choose in order to continue conversation. So conversations can be divided into 4 different types. And this type is based on a couple different factors. First of all, is this conversation one or two-way? And second of all, is it cooperative or competitive? By two-way, we mean that a conversation is able to involve both parties in a fairly even way, right? So if you're having a two-way conversation, maybe it's you and a friend talking about what you did over the weekend. So you share a little bit about your weekend, they share a bit about theirs, right? You have the chance to mutually engage on the topic. One way would be one person primarily talking active, right? It's not necessarily. Then we have cooperative versus competitive. Cooperative means that both people in the conversation are able to get their goals met. They're able to communicate with each other in a way that helps them to work together to achieve whatever goals, such as safety or social needs that they have. Whereas competitive is the idea that the resources and needs are scarce. And so one person is trying to get those needs at the expense of the other person. So cooperative two-way communication is called dialogue. How many people have ever read any of the dialogues from Plato? It's not very many of you. So Plato wrote the 5 dialogues that involve Socrates, right? The Greeks were very fond of saying that dialectic or dialogue is useful because it helps us reach the truth. That through conversation and working together, hashing out our problems and hashing out our differences, we can come to learn more, right? So if you ever read 5 dialogues, Socrates, it's really annoying because he asks a lot of questions and questions people's assumptions and beliefs, right? He's constantly questioning and using dialogue and two-way communication to learn. So dialogue is something that we do to engage and learn with other people and mutually benefit from conversation. Meanwhile, we have debate, right? So debate is something I did competitively, right? Speech and debate, but we also see debate in the context of politics, right? We have the midterm elections coming up this next week, and we've seen a lot of candidates, including candidates for governor, Senate, House races, and so on, right, who have been involved in some public and high-profile debates. And in debates, people do get the opportunity to speak, right? Each group or person gets a certain amount of time to speak, but their goal is to convince another person, for example, a swing voter or an undecided voter, to support them. And that vote can only go one way. So it's this idea trying to get somebody over to your side. Discourse is one way of cooperative. So one way of thinking about discourse is to think about something such as a lecture or a guest speaker, right? It's primarily one person communicating, but their goal is to create cooperation, to create education, to support the other people in that group, right? And then lastly, we have the idea of a diatribe. The best example I can give of a diatribe is like you're venting, right? It's not necessarily that you want the other person to have a lot to say in response, but it's more that you're trying to convey what you see as important to you. So for instance, maybe you have a really rough weekend, your family members were being really disrespectful, and you just want to talk to somebody about it, right? In a diatribe, you're making your needs met, you're getting it out there, you're probably feeling better through that conversation, right? But the other person isn't really engaging in this. Or there's the whole joke about somebody who goes to see a therapist and they spend the whole session talking and the therapist doesn't say anything. And at the end, they're like, oh, thank you. This is so helpful, right? It's communicating primarily for your sake. Yeah. 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 So venting, you know, kind of sharing information that's more about you getting your needs met would fit under that quadrant. So 4 different ways that we use conversation pretty regularly. And we use conversation, again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to fulfill a lot of different needs. Some of those needs are physical. So physical needs could include things such as talking to a friend and saying, hey, really need to go use the restroom, right? Identity-based. So for instance, members of the LGBTQ community oftentimes will use conversation as a way of coming out or disclosing parts of their identity to other people. Or social. So we fulfill social needs because we have a good friend. We really enjoy spending time with that friend and catching up with them. You know, maybe go down to Benchwarmers and talk with them and get to know them better. So thinking back to Maslow's hierarchy, we use conversation to fulfill a lot of key needs. Motives refer to our motivation or desire to communicate. So why do we choose to engage in conversation? Well, there's a few different factors. One of them is control. So sometimes we use communication for control. For instance, maybe your roommates have been really loud and have been throwing parties in your dorm, and you say, hey, I really need to sleep. Can you please turn it down? We use communication motives for relaxation or to rest. So sometimes, right, maybe we're having a more relaxed, casual, kickback conversation with somebody that helps us to unwind for the day. Escape. So sometimes, right, we communicate in order to divert or avoid a topic or issue. If you have seen any of the classic, like, will they, won't they characters in TV shows, like in Friends or The Office, right, there's this common trope of people about to share their feelings, but then they change the subject or get interrupted. Right? Or maybe somebody starts asking you about how your grades are doing, and then you're like, oh, hey, that's a nice sweater you've got there, right? So we'll use escape to change the subject. We communicate for inclusion, right? So we use conversation to express our emotions. Again, inviting somebody who might have attended your club after the club to come and talk with you and share that they're glad to have you on board. We use conversation for affection, right? Expressing love. There's this idea of different love languages, right? You might express your love through verbal support, through gestures and nonverbal communication, through gifts, through flattery. And then lastly, we're motivated based on pleasure. We communicate oftentimes because it feels exciting or enjoyable to us. Maybe we have a friend who tells all these really wild stories, and we really enjoy hearing them and hearing what they have to say. When we communicate, the process of conversation is a process of self-disclosure, right? If we think about it, we wear a persona or mask or reputation that we carry with ourselves. And self-disclosure through communication is our process of gradually taking off that mask and showing who we are, right? And we disclose and share more about ourselves through social integration. If we're talking in a group of people about their favorite types of music, you know, and you've got a group over there who, like, you know, is talking about how Joy Division is their favorite band ever, right? And they really enjoy that type of music. You might jump in and talk about your own favorite type of music. So we integrate socially by sharing more about ourselves because that adds to the conversation. And managing our impressions, right? What does our reputation or persona look like to other people? How do we want other people to look at us? If we're using an Instagram filter, right? That's an example of impression management, of managing how we appear and are perceived by others. So the last idea I want to hit on before today's activity is to think about the ways that we manage our impression. You might think back to uncertainty reduction theory in the example of the TV show Catfish, right? Where people will portray themselves online in a way that's dishonest to who they are. That is a very elaborate example of impression management.
In fact, oftentimes our friends on social media might have a very different version of themselves that they portray online. If they're on Instagram and they're showing all these wild places that they've traveled that are different than how they might realistically be, whether it's through filters and alteration or just showing different sides of themselves to manage their impressions. Impression management involves self-descriptions. So what do you tell other people about yourself? So for instance, you may say, I make a really good chili to show that you're a good cook and using that as a positive. An account, right? So an account would be somebody who is denying or downplaying a negative reputation about that person, right? So I don't know why, but I saw that like really weird live action Lady and the Tramp remake. And there's a whole song in the musical, right? Where the tramp, who's the stray dog, has this song about how he's such a loner and he doesn't like anybody, right? And he's trying to like respond to that and say, no, I do want to make friends. I do want to have good relationships with other people. Sometimes, right, there's stereotypes or there is a reputation about you that you try to downplay or move against. I'm not really a loner. Apologies would be downplaying an incident. I'm so sorry that I came in late. My bus didn't come on time. I hope I didn't miss anything. Oftentimes we use apologies to downplay the issue to maintain a reputation or face. We have entitlements and enhancements, where if something good has happened that you're associated with, you'll oftentimes try to take the credit for that. So maybe you're involved in a group project for the class, and as you're presenting the group project, you say, oh yeah, that cool diagram there in this slide, I made it, right? So showing that you contributed to the group well. Flattery and favors are ways that we either compliment somebody else or do other things for that person so that they'll like us. This is especially common, for instance, if you're starting a new job and you want to make a good impression with a supervisor or boss. You might choose to flatter them and say, oh, you have a great outfit today, or offer them a gift. So that would be an example of managing impressions in that context as well. So we manage our impressions, particularly through the use of conversation. So what I want you to do for your attendance today that you'll be turning in is to take some time and think about somebody that you talk to regularly. This could be a candidate for your recording and reflection essay. And which of those 4 types of conversation do you most commonly use among the ones we talked about? Using the communication motives, which best explains your conversations with this person? And then lastly, how do you manage your impression with this person? So what might be strategies of impression management you use? So I'll give you some time to think through this and share your thoughts.
if you have finished, I want you to just take a couple minutes to chat with somebody or a group of three about some of the things that you discussed and some of the similarities that you might notice and how you're talking with this person.
Almost, just need to figure out which one. Focus mine on most of our dialogue, either stories or
I feel like it depends on what the relationship you have with the person. You have like friends, it's gonna be dialogue. Sometimes I chose the guy I grew up with and moved away. We mainly just call and talk about what's going on in our lives, but like, not like dialogue and fits with that.
yeah. Well, I guess when you look at it, like the four choices, those are just breaking up of what type of truck is it, a car, is it semi?
Oh, yeah.
So go ahead and finish up your conversation.
I mean, it was pleasure and self-description. Almost don't have ourselves. Person, but it's also apologizing.
Yeah, I also chose self-description.
I don't-
Yeah, you're just talking about what's going on. So.
It might be flattery or favor, like, in the sense you feel like.
Okay. So I hope this is useful as you're starting to think about and brainstorm what conversation you'd like to do for your essay. So we took some time today to talk about that assignment and midterm. We talked about conversation and the role of conversations have in communication and how we navigate our identities and disclosing those identities. We'll get into that in more detail on Wednesday as we get into social penetration theory and start to look at listening and how we do listening. So please email or pass forward the attendance activity for today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you again for Wednesday's class.